is being put on by ACENET. So if you haven't heard of us, we are a publicly funded organization through government and post-secondary institutions in Atlantic Canada. We are a regional partner with Compute Canada, which is responsible for digital research infrastructure nationally. And through that, we're able to provide digital research tools and infrastructure to Atlantic Canada. We serve about 350 researchers in this region, plus their teams, so it's about 1,000 people. Our services are free of charge to post-secondary researchers and their teams in Canada, and because we use Canadian infrastructure, all of the data we store stays in Canada. We also have research consultants like myself and Grace located throughout Atlantic Canada to help you figure out what you need and get started with our services, as well as providing ongoing support for duration of projects. We do a wide range of training, generic, custom, novice, advanced, etc., which includes this workshop series. I'd like to introduce James Doiron, who is leading this presentation today. He's the Research Data Management Services Coordinator at the University of Alberta Libraries and the Academic Director of the U of A Research Data Center. He has an educational background in social sciences, psychology, and criminology, and he has extensive applied research and data management experience across a wide range of disciplines, areas of focus, and data types. James actively sits on a number of local, national, and international advisory and working groups, including both as a member of the U of A's Institutional Research Data Management Strategy Working Group and Health Research Ethics Board, the Statistics Canada Data Liberation Initiative, External Advisory Committee, and the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research Council. James is the co-chair of the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, Portage Network Data Management Planning Expert Group, and is additionally a member of the Portage Research Data Management Training Expert Group, as well as the Dataverse North Working Group. So thank you very much, James, for being with us today. I am going to start recording now, and I invite you to begin your presentation.
Thanks so much, Lydia, and thanks to everyone who's joined in today. I hope that the session's useful for you. I'll run you through a basic high level of what we're going to talk about here today, and just hope that everybody's doing as well as can be under these challenging times. Just before we start, I'd also like to just acknowledge that I'm delivering this webinar today from an absolutely beautiful day here on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people, whose histories and languages and cultures continue to really enrich and influence our lives and communities. So I'm still, on the note of the beautiful day, I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around that it's July 28th. It's going to be 30 degrees here in Edmonton, and I'm going to watch an exhibition hockey game tonight between Edmonton and Calgary. But in these days and age, that's not the weirdest thing happening by any means. So today I'm going to be talking, as the title suggests, data management planning, but just to give you a bit of an overview. I hope that, my hope is that you can walk away today with some really good foundational information and some resources. I mean, if you can get that out of this alone, I think hopefully that's time well spent. So foundational information, just giving you some sense of what are data management plans, why are they important, how can they help you with your research, as well as then going through a general high level on their content. And I take that by a kind of a section by section approach. As well, I want to give you some resources. So we've recently released some exemplar data management plans through Portage. We have more on the go. As well, I want to provide you with the information to be able to use the Portage DMP Assistant platform, which is a freely available bilingual tool, which is endorsed by the tri-agency. And so that's a tool that you can use yourselves to actually develop and work on data management plans as you move forward. So just give me a quick moment. I'm just going to get my screen share and get things set up here, and then we'll jump into the slides. So I can't see the chat or anything. If a burning question comes up, Lydia, feel free to just chime in and interrupt me. Past that, I'll have that natural break there while I'll throw it out there to see if there are some questions. Just as we start to move into it, I'd just like to start off with kind of the bigger picture. And so that's, what is research data management? And for someone like me who kind of lives and breathes it, it's pretty much everything. But I think this is just a good kind of succinct bird's eye view. This research data lifecycle diagram. It certainly makes it look a lot easier than it is in real life, those of us who are involved in research. But it gets, I think, the points across. And whether you're involved in funded or unfunded research project, you're coming up with an idea, you're formulating hypotheses, perhaps, you're coming up with the framework for your project, and hopefully things move forward and you start to go out there into the field and either collect or acquire data. You're going to be processing and analyzing data and sharing it. In this sense, what they really mean by that is disseminating. And then I know when I was first learning research during my undergrad years, that was it. It was the end of the project. At that time, there wasn't even much talk around open access journals, let alone the deposition of research data. But we know that today it's a very different landscape, and certainly with some of the policies that are coming through, we'll speak a little bit about those, and the different approaches that we're taking with organizations, universities, and such. The preservation, curation, the deposition of research data is becoming more and more the norm. So thinking about that and how do data management plans come in to support that. The earlier you can get in to start thinking about how you're going to manage your data, the better off you're going to be. So we're going to talk a bit about that detailed content as we go through those sections there. I just want to point to, I'm sure many of you are already aware of these, but for those possibly who aren't, or just as a reminder, the Tri-Agency released a research data management policy draft in 2018, which was actually a follow-up to a statement that they had released a couple years before. So a bit of where there's smoke, there's fire, and we knew that these were coming. There's a link there for you so you can familiarize with those draft policies. We had expected the release of a final policy here in spring 2020. In fact, it feels like a lifetime ago now, but I was out at the University of Ottawa at the end of February delivering a research data management day and on a panel with Tri-Agency folks, and they had actually said at that time they figured March, April latest. Of course, we all know that COVID-19 sadly hit not just Canada, but globally. And so that's delayed the release of those policy. We hope now for a potential fall release, though it could even get pushed out a little bit further, depending upon a lot of variables. But just to give you an idea of what these policies speak to. Sorry, I'm having a little lag with my internet, so if my slides seem to stagger, apologies for that. The draft policy speaks to three main pillars. The first is around institutional research data management strategy. And so that means that every institution in Canada, if you're going to be administering tri-agency funds, once these policies are released and the time has gone by for institutions to develop, implement, and then publicly release a research data management strategy. Again, lots of details there. That could be an entirely standalone presentation. Portage has released a number of supports, templates, and guiding documents to help institutions with that. I know that many of my colleagues and ourselves here at U of A are very busy working on those strategies. The second pillar is around data management plans. And so, of course, we're going to be talking a lot about those today. And then the third is around the data deposition. So retaining and preserving and making your research discoverable and potentially your data accessible, whether that be open or restricted access. There's different models for that. Sorry, my screens are really lagging on me here, so I'm just going to bring this down to a smaller view rather than have you guys waiting each time. So there's some takeaway points from the policy. Again, I spoke about the institute strategy. Around data management plans specifically, the notion is that specific funding opportunities moving forward may require data management plans to be submitted. So it's not that the policy is going to be released and then suddenly, the entire landscape changes in the blink of an eye. it'd be more that the policy is released. There's going to be some time to allow institutions first to get strategies together and released if they're not, because different institutions are very much different places. And then perhaps around 6 months or so, 4 to 6 months after that, we would start to see funding calls coming out. And let's say, for instance, it's a CIHR funding call, and then in that specific call, they will say, and additionally, one of the requirements for this call is that you develop and provide a data management plan. So again, it will see it kind of incrementally coming in as things move forward. So what is a data management plan? It's a document which will really help to clarify and articulate all the strategies and tools that you will use and implement to manage your data throughout your research. It speaks both to the active phases of research, but also after the completion of a research project. So again, thinking about, we're done disseminating, we've published papers, and you may still have more to publish or more to do with that data, but it's making those data available for others, whether that's for replication purposes for your research or potential repurposing. And again, I just want to highlight though too, I cut my teeth, so to speak, in health research. So I'm always thinking about confidentiality, privacy, what we're bound to ethically, and so forth. So this is not to say that all data, all versions of data would necessarily need to be deposited or made open, and I don't think that the funders are saying that either necessarily, and that there is the word appropriate that I like to use with that. So appropriate accessibility, again, so some data may be wide open, publicly available, but there's times when it's justified that data are working under more of a restricted or mediated access, and there's lots of different supports and solutions out there to support those. So this is just a nice kind of bird's eye view of the research lifecycle categories that are within actually the DMP Assistant. So when you embark on your data management plan, you start looking at the different things that you think about. Categories are right here. So things like data collection, documentation and metadata, storage and backup. Where are you going to have your data during the active phases? How are you going to promote or support the sharing and reuse of the data? If that's applicable, responsibilities and resources, preservation, and then of course, ethics and legal compliance. So we will be going through each of those sections to some degree here in terms of the content for the DMP during this presentation. So why are DMPs important? They're important for lots of different reasons. They're going to, again, I think anybody that works on any type of project or managing projects will agree that planning is always a good thing. So the notion of planning for the management of your data as early as possible will really help for you to set out strategies at the start in terms of how you will be managing your data throughout the life cycle. And this is really important for projects of all sizes, but it gets more complex and perhaps even raises the bar in terms of importance when you get into larger projects where you have many different people doing different yet related activities. And we know that more and more research that is multi-institutional or interdisciplinary is becoming the norm. So again, managing data and the planning for that can really, really support the active phases and ultimately the research that comes out of the project. It can really help for you to identify both strengths and weaknesses in how you're making decisions and how you're managing data. We're doing lots of great things. I've been supporting research or been involved in my own research for more years than I'll probably care to admit, but I've learned a lot of lessons as I've gone. I certainly look back at some of the methods that I used or some of the decisions I made and know there was room for improvement. So that's great. I can learn from my own experiences. It really does help for you prepare your data for future reuse. And I don't want to just think about others using it, think about yourselves using it as well. I often, when I work with research projects, think about every project, or I say this, think about every project as potentially going to be a really successful pilot. And if that's the case, you need to be able to use those data again. You need to be able to very easily understand them. So for your own purposes, being able to reuse them, the data management plan can be really helpful even. And of course, planning hopefully makes things more efficient, which helps to reduce the cost of research. And I think of cost in many ways, not just the funding, which is obviously a big important part if it's a funded research model, and it's certainly not getting easier to get the funds, but also just thinking about resources and time and sweat equity. And again, I think that my opinion is that one of, if not the most valuable commodity that researchers have is their time. So if you can reduce the administrative burden and help to really help have the research flow efficiently, I think that's doing a great service for the projects and for the research. So when should I start creating a data management plan? Well, I mean, as you might expect, early as possible. So we are working with researchers more and more at the grant writing stage, again, just using the funded model. Moving forward in our institutional strategy, once we get down to kind of the how are we going to support the strategies, I imagine that there will be different stakeholders on campus involved in supporting these. So for instance, our research services office could be involved in supporting funding calls that, and when they require a DMP, just like they require other things, they could help to support to ensure that that happened and that there was a DMP developed. I just want to really, and we'll talk about this later as well, though, I want to really highlight that data management plans are living documents. So the notion most certainly is not that you are going to create a data management plan before you've even embarked on the research and have every answer to every question and know definitively how you're going to manage your data and then it's written in stone. That is not the model at all. Especially as we get again into larger, more complex projects, very rarely see where all of the answers are there. But what the DMP does is it makes you ask yourself the questions, and you can't answer questions that you don't know to ask. So it's really, I think, a helpful guide in that sense. And hopefully you'll see some of the supports and resources that I'll show you a bit later supporting in that. And there are times when you may need to modify your data management plan. I have been involved in research projects, longitudinal ones certainly, where, for instance, in year 3, we decided to do some things different than we thought we were going to do because there was some new technology available, for instance, on a CFI that I was working on. And so we went back and updated and revised our DMP and reflected that. Just like you might go and revise and amend an ethics application. It's the same kind of concept in that sense. So I'm going to jump into just by each section briefly a bit of the content piece, and then we'll stop and just ask some questions. But again, if there's a burning question, if we see a few people asking the same one during any of these next slides here, feel free to interrupt me and we can address any of those. So some months ago, we started working on developing Exemplar DMPs. That was one of the biggest asks. It was the data management planning expert group that I co-chair for Portage. We had researchers and community members and other stakeholders saying, can you give us some examples? And that made perfect sense. One of the things that I was very keen to recognize, though, is before you can define something as an exemplar, you need to actually give it some criteria. You need to give it some rules, so to speak, not to make it stifling, but to help guide and hopefully actually add some flexibility, but meaningfully. And so these are the guidelines that actually fed into and are currently feeding into our next round of exemplar developing DMPs. So it can kind of give you a bit of a guideline when you're developing your own data management plans. And I'm also going to give you some links to those exemplar DMPs, and we've got another 8 in the hopper now that I hope to see released at the end of the summer, early fall. So first off, these are just general guidelines, so not section specific, not disciplinary specific at all. But within the DMP Assistant, there's a section for describing your research. And so we would encourage that everybody do that, just add in a brief description. It's the abstract type level of what your project is, what its goals are, kind of a general description piece, very lay terms is fine. Just helps for anybody that's reviewing and reading your DMP, just get that immediate kind of sense of what that project's about. We use a lot of jargon sometimes in research, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because sometimes those are the only words we can use, or those ones we're just so used to using. Again, just kind of thinking about it though, your DMP should hopefully be able to be easily understood by anyone. So if there's opportunities to not use the jargon, or if you need to use some of those words that are very specific to your discipline or to your research methodology of the project, to just kind of clearly explain them, expand upon them, so that anybody reading it could potentially understand it. And of course, in research, we absolutely love our acronyms. So we use them all the time. I overuse them every day, I'm sure. But just we ask that people provide clarification for any acronyms used. And so my kind of rule for that is for any section, so those kind of sections we looked at, data collection, preservation, so forth, if the first time you use an acronym within any given section, just expanding on it and explaining it, you can't assume that somebody is going to go read your DMP from start to finish. So if you can just do that in each section, I find that really tends to clarify things for readers. Not leaving sections or questions blank. And that one's probably my biggest pet peeve, because you don't know if somebody's actually read the question. Is it not applicable? Are they just thinking about it? So if you're developing your DMP, and there are times when some questions specifically, especially in our standard Portage DMP template, they aren't applicable to a project. So it's okay to say that, and it's not applicable, and the reasons why. And speaking of reasons, that's another one, is just always providing rationale for decisions made. So not just saying we're doing X, Y, or Z, but explaining why we're doing X, Y, or Z. We are going to store our data here, or we're going to leverage this data collection tool or this data repository, and just explaining the whys of it. The more information you can provide, the better and more clear it's going to be. Again, and I'm just thinking about the moving ahead for others to look at your DMP to guide them, but also ostensibly we're going to look forward and see DMPs potentially be part of the grant review process. And I don't think that's happening overnight by any means. In fact, I know it won't, but I do see it potentially down the road. So so the more that you can just kind of get into the practice early and now with DMPs around these best practices, I think the better off you're going to be in helping yourselves in your research. And again, we've already spoken to this. Your DMP is a living document, so you can update it as needed. And hopefully that'll become a little clearer how you can do some of these things once I show you the DMP Assistant tool in a few slides now. So just looking into now each section and briefly, I'm just mindful of time, so I'll try to go over these fairly quickly without glossing too much over. And of course, these slides are going to be made available to you, so you'll have everything here. You don't need to frantically write it down or anything. But in terms of data collection, so just describing how you're going to be collecting your data, including from where and in what format. So are you, I'm just going to use for today's purposes, thinking about things like mixed methods research. It's one I've been working on a lot right now for exemplars and a new DMP template for DMP Assistant. So if you're going to be collecting survey data, for instance, how are you collecting that data? Are you using a web-based platform? Are you using a proprietary platform? Where are you going to be collecting the data, how it's storing it? And just making sure you understand kind of the formats of the data. Those ones are pretty straightforward. But when we get into using proprietary software at times, then we'll get formats that are just that, proprietary. Are we able to get those converted into non-proprietary formats so that anyone could potentially use them? So just kind of thinking ahead at that point about some of those things. You want to think about how much data you're going to collect. Are these small projects where you're collecting literally megabytes of data, or is it starting to go into gigs, which is certainly not large data? But once you get into terabytes, that starts really being a game changer for many things, including both your active storage, needing to know how am I going to support the storage of that? Where am I going to store the data during our research so that all of those people that need to access it can do that safely and securely and appropriately, and it's backed up. But also thinking about the later stages, so the preservation of data. If you're looking to deposit and preserve, for instance, terabytes of data, that's a totally different beast than looking at even doing it with 100 gigs of data. And we have different platforms and different resources available. So when I'm talking to researchers, doing consults for research data management, I'm thinking about those things. And that helps for me to plan and help to give them guidance ahead of time. Again, describing any of the software platforms that be used for data collection, and not just how you're going to store your data, but how you're going to transfer your data. And that could be, again, if you're collecting survey data, for instance, in an online platform, there's going to be a way to export the data, hopefully a secure way to transfer that, get that into wherever it is that you're working with it and your researchers are accessing it. So just thinking about that ahead of time, and often when we've had those conversations with researchers, I've been able to point them to resources, and many times over been able to see them find better solutions than probably what they thought they had. Similarly, if you were, for instance, doing qualitative research, and you're going out using digital voice recorders, or using Zoom is starting to be used now for qualitative research, especially in this virtual world, how are you going to store those data and transfer them, and make sure that you're doing that in ways that are abiding by any requirements you have by your funders or your institution, or that you're bound to by your ethics applications. And then thinking about how you're going to be organizing your data. So file naming and file versioning. We will create data and different versions from raw, and there may be a couple of different versions in between, and to the point where you have a master processed clean data, both in terms of perhaps quality assurance, as well as de-identification and anonymization if that's needed. And all of those versions add up as well when you think about the size of the data. So these things are interrelated, and thinking about how you're going to have file naming and file versioning and making sure you can find and understand your data. And by happenstance, Lydia and I worked together on a project some years ago. I should say more, I supported the project through a secure virtual research environment that we had. And I think a lot of this type of stuff was really helpful for that project in terms of understanding how to get to the data, and organizing the data, and file naming conventions and all those things that can really support the research. And there's some projects in that environment that I can still go back to today, 6, 7, 8 years removed, and find any data that I want because of those file naming conventions and the really great data management. Documentation and metadata, which can be as clear as mud to many folks, to be quite honest. I thought I knew metadata really well before I came into the libraries, which is coming in about 5 years in libraries now. And then I met colleagues of mine that are like very literally experts in metadata. And I understood that I was a layperson at it. But knowing that we have those experts around us, and that we have lots of resources out there, no shortage of resources, and it's evolving, is really great. And we try to provide as much as we can information, resources, and certainly as we move forward with evolving the DMP Assistant, particularly the guidance that's within that for researchers. But essentially, you need to think about what is the information that you're going to be needing in order to understand or to reuse the data. And again, not just for others, but for yourself, using that successful pilot analogy, coming back to a project 2 and 3 years later, when you're out of all of the detail of it, and you've probably been involved in numerous other projects and or activities. This is the type of information that allows you to come back and fairly, hopefully seamlessly be able to understand the data and begin to work with it, and perhaps repurpose it, reuse it moving forward. And thinking about then how are you going to capture that documentation through the project. And that can be difficult. I've been there. I've spent more years in soft grant funded environments down in the trenches, managing very large projects, national projects where we have so many people involved, and how are we going to document it? So I'm a pretty big fan of lean but meaningful policies and protocols, and that those never have to be written in stone either, that you can come back and change them as you learn lessons and such. But that's the approach I took in that secure virtual environment I was speaking about earlier that I oversaw, where I would come in and collaborate with a project and help them to come up with some of these processes and protocols for doing things like capturing metadata. And we had processes in place to do checks on the file naming, for instance. And more than a few times on some projects, we caught files being named wrong. And sometimes it's not such a big deal, but in those cases, these were actually files names, for instance, of interviews, and if it was named wrong and said the interview happened in Victoria, but it actually happened in Edmonton, that's a really big deal. That's one of the ways that we're going to be analyzing the data. So being able to capture these things at the front end and have a little process for that is really, really helpful and supportive. And then there's no shortage of metadata standards out there as well, and we have some links to those again in the DMP Assistant. If there is a metadata standard that's suited to your discipline or to perhaps the repository that you're later on potentially going to be depositing data in, then thinking about those or discovering what those are, learning more about them. Again, we're really lucky, and I'm sure many others are, where we have a great metadata team in our libraries, as well as experts across campus, and sometimes disciplinary experts are the ones we go to, but just thinking about that ahead, connecting with those experts, reaching out. We've got through Portage and Metadata working groups and training resources. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can get up to speed or get some guidance provided. And it's not to say that there's always a standard that is out of the box or able to be used for every project. But that's something that you will know and determine simply by doing these exercises and looking into these types of things. Thinking about storage and backup, again, this goes back to the general things to do around the size and storage space. So thinking about how much storage space you need and remembering to take into account file versioning, backups, and growth of data. And it's tough to think about exactly how much, so that's not the goal here, but it's to get a general proxy for how much data you're going to have. Again, if you know you're getting up into like 100 gigs, then that's going to be a much different story than 10 gigs or getting into terabytes. And now how are we going to support actually storing and accessing them and working with them? There's lots of different resources potentially available. One of the ones that we are starting to use more and more is Compute Canada's rapid access service, which allows cloud-based storage that's accessible to and freely available to researchers across Canada. And we're working with them a bit to see how we can use those in different ways. One of the main reasons Compute Canada started that and it's been used is for high performance computing, and still is, and it's a great resource for that. But I've actually had projects that are smaller qualitative projects, for instance, that have been able to be stored there, very niche, very confidential, secure types of data. And so we've been able to leverage it in those ways. So I'm really excited to see where some of these types of environments can go. It's fairly easy to work through, physical and technical types of details. And that's not to say it is easy. I just to say it's relatively easy, in my opinion, versus the administrative details, and especially once you start working with sensitive data. So those are the types of things that we're looking to work on. And certainly here at the University of Alberta, as part of our institutional research data management strategy, we're thinking about how can we support those and have more support for centralized, secure virtual research environments to support our researchers and the research. And then thinking about how are your collaborators or your researchers going to be able to work with the data during the active phases. The days of having them, on a laptop and then having to, go and email things, hopefully not, but, figure out ways to transfer data to somebody. Those were really challenging days, and we have lots of different resources, and hopefully people do have them at their institutions, organizations, but knowing that everybody has different contexts. But hopefully we have more and more things that you can leverage and use. And again, that Compute Canada is a really good, I think, example of that, a remotely accessible environment where now I don't have to go and transfer the data to somebody. I don't have to put it into an email or through a secure FTP to get to them. They can go into the research environment and work on it there. That's really nice for security and confidentiality, absolutely, but also for backing up of the data, disaster recovery, as well as just the file versioning. Once you send and transfer files, you have no more control over it. And so files can kind of grow and populate like rabbits in the springtime. Sometimes I know that I've done it in the past. So anytime you can kind of rein that in and have places for people to work that's more remotely accessible, I think, and has the tools and the software that you can need to use to conduct your research, I think the better off we are. Thinking about preservation. This is a big topic right now, and certainly is big on the national landscape. We've got a lot of work going in around preservation. We've got Portage has a preservation expert group, our new digital research infrastructure organization, Andrio, that will be kicking in officially in October, is very much thinking about this as well. So I just have, I guess, two main points around this, because we can't get into it all. First, it's that not all data necessarily needs to be preserved. So it's not to say that all of the data that you collect within a research project and all of the versions need to necessarily be preserved. there's going to be decisions to be made within any given project based on the context. So considering the things like what's the value of your data, right? If you think that this is valuable data, if you think that it's something that either you or others may need to access for long-term preservation. So I'm talking about beyond that 5 to 7 years, that typically say ethics requires you to retain your data a minimum of. I'm thinking about the longer tail. So think about the value there. Are there requirements in place moving forward? For instance, if the Tri-Agency releases their policy, are there funded requirements in place, or if you're funded by another funding agency? And then helping to maybe consider which data should be preserved. And maybe you can work with your experts in your institution or libraries, or reach out to Portage or others, and make those decisions there. That thinking about that ahead of time, I think, is really, really helpful. And kind of as well can help guide where to put in some of your resources moving forward as you embark on the research around the preservation of data. And then thinking about the file formats, and I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but again, thinking about if you're going to preserve data, how am I going to help make sure that others can use it? If we've got really niche, proprietary, or soon to be defunct file formats, it can make it really difficult for others. They may not have the software required to open it up. It may be easier or less easy or even impossible to get it converted into a format that can be read and used and accessed. So just working under that kind of that line of thought that preserved data really should be able to be used fairly easily by anyone without requiring that proprietary software. I oversee our institutional research data repository here at U of A, Dataverse, and many institutions in Canada have a Dataverse instance. And that's one of the things I speak to up front with researchers. And at times they may want to deposit their data in that proprietary format. It might make sense. It's a software that does a specific purpose for that research, and others are maybe very likely to want it in that format as well. And I think that's fine. But what we try to do when able is additionally deposit a non-proprietary version as well, so that others, again, down the road will be able to use it for sure. Thinking about sharing and reuse. So again, that word appropriate. What's the appropriate sharing of your data? What does that look like? Are there any funding requirements? Are there any confidentiality requirements? In order to share data and have it potentially be used outside of the primary research project, when you're conducting research involving human participants, you do need express consent for that. So this is, again, why it's important to think about this upfront and early. I have seen more times than I wish projects that had not addressed that early in their consent stage, and it was prohibitive to them being able to use the data, whether for themselves or for others beyond that project, because at times it's either going to be really difficult or even impossible to go back to participants and get their consent, whether that's by the sheer magnitude or you just no longer have their contact information, you've destroyed that as per ethics, those types of things. So again, thinking about those early will be I think really helpful for you. Explaining what uses can be made of your data through licenses, and anyone who's deposited data, again, I know Dataverse best, so I'll speak to that. There is actually a feature there for folks to indicate the license, so if that's an open license, but also we do have data that's in there that is discoverable, but it's mediated access. And so there's also a feature to allow for folks to have a customized terms of use. So whether you have requirements imposed by providers of data, stewards of data, or if it's primarily collected data and you have terms of use or even copyright or intellectual property, then these are things that you can actually make explicitly clear within and put it in with the data for others to have to acknowledge and read and abide by. Thinking about what repository might be most appropriate for you. So if you have, again, you're at an institution, you have colleagues in library or others, you can reach out through Portage, for instance, thinking about where would it be most appropriate. We have choices today, which is fantastic, because going back even 10 years ago, there was very few choices on data repositories, but that's not the case now, and it's growing. I do care where people put their data, but I don't care in the sense of that I want them to put it where they feel comfortable and that's meeting all the requirements that they might have to meet and is supporting their research. So if that means that our institutional data repository is a fit, fantastic. I'm happy to work with them on that. If they have larger data, for instance, getting into hundreds of gigs or into terabytes, the Federated Research Data Repository, that is a partnership largely between Compute Canada and Portage and some others, has become a really great resource here on our national landscape. And I've had a few users at U of A now leverage it. Or it may be that there's a disciplinary research data repository that's the best fit. There's a link there to re3data.org. And it has literally thousands of repositories, so enough to make your eyes cross when you go to it. But it's a really great one-stop source around repositories, even if you're just generally wanting to see what's out there and understand, or find repositories that you can go peruse for data as well. So I invite you to take a look at that. It's a great resource that gets updated regularly. And the big piece around the data repository, regardless of where you deposit it, is that it's assigning a digital object identifier, which is a DOI, a persistent identifier, and that is really key to making your research discoverable, first and foremost, which also helps for you to get citations on your data and your research. I think about bidirectional discovery when I think about DOIs. So the kind of, when I was, learning research in my undergrad, the typical way of discovering research was reading academic papers and journals. And that is still the case today. But with data repositories and the DOIs there, you can actually link up publications to data. So I could be doing that, reading the journal, and then within it see that, oh, they have data and they've deposited it. There's the digital object identifier. There's the place I go to see the data, potentially access the data. But vice versa, somebody could be perusing a data repository or looking specifically for research that you've been involved in, or the types of research you've been involved in, see your data, and then that data could be linked up to outputs. Oh, look at that. They've actually put out a few papers on this data set or this type of research. I'm going to go look at those. So there's really a lot of research discoverability components that come with it. And then thinking about, again, how you'll ensure that you have good quality data, anonymized data, de-identified data. And these are things that are not new to the landscape by any means, but they're certainly upped when you're thinking about when you're sharing your data and making sure that you are appropriately sharing it. Responsibilities and resources. This is can be really tough on some projects, and I'm experiencing it now with some projects as well, where you get more and more people involved, large, very large funded and pan-Canadian projects, for instance, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. So thinking about who has the roles and responsibilities for managing the data. Research data management is a shared responsibility. It should not all be on one person or one entity. Nor do I think that the principal investigators need to take it all on, which I think is how they felt for a long time, and hopefully that's starting to change. There is viable budget line items in most research grants now that you can build in research data management support, but also just making sure that you have folks on board in your project. Maybe you have designated positions, whether that's paid or unpaid, but just the default of, we'll all just do the best we can isn't a great one. So trying to help give guidelines and help designate roles and responsibilities can be really supportive and helpful. And again, you can always course correct as you go in your research project. Keep the things that are working, modify, replace the things that aren't. And then thinking about any costs and resources that might be required to manage your data. If you're using proprietary platforms or things for storing your data, those types of things, those cost money. If you have to hire a position, or you need to offset somebody's position to even a part-time to help manage data, again, those are budget line items and things to think about in terms of resources, but also going back to that notion that time is resources. So these things don't manage themselves, and you have to be, I think, realistic, or at least be open to understanding that and kind of building in that time and making it a priority. And then recognizing that if you do need help with it, then that's a way to identify that early. And then finally, the ethics and legal compliance. So again, are there any ethical, legal, any intellectual property issues when managing and sharing your data? Being sure that you're retaining those. Again, actually just recently was working on a project with somebody where there was most definitely copyright and IP details to work through. We are, again, really fortunate where we're at. I have a wonderful colleague, a copyright librarian that I can tap into whenever I need, and she came in and really provided expertise and guidance. So, you know, thinking about that at the very front end for this very long tail stuff is really helpful, and just knowing that you're okay as you move forward. Because once your data horses are out of the gate, you're collecting data and you're in the midst of all the research, it's tough to find the time to take care of these types of details later on. Not impossible. And it's also, I just want to say, never too late to start a DMP. I've been talking about, you know, starting it at the grant fundraising stage. That is not probably the norm still, although I love seeing it when it happens. But, you know, we get a lot of times when people are very much in the midst of their project, and we've come in and brought in a data management plan at that stage, and it's still been very helpful. And just, you know, talking about how your data will be managed after the project, and thinking about that, you know, where am I going to put my data? Do I have data that's deposited for discoverability and potential access, but then also versions of data that aren't going to be deposited in a repository, but I still need to retain for that 5-7 years? How's that happening? So thinking about how I can meet any requirements, obligations, and make sure that things are being appropriately and securely supported. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. Again, just conscious of time. That's a real bird's eye whirlwind kind of tour through the categories of the DMP Assistant. I hope it was helpful at that high level, but I'm going to stop now. And if there's any burning questions, please feel free to bring them forth, Lydia or others.
Yeah, we don't have any questions in the chat. So I can pause the recording, and if anybody has any on-mic questions, get the recording again.
Well, let's start with some resources here, and this is just links. I mentioned that although those categories that we went through, those really were the framework for what became our kind of criteria for helping to develop our exemplar DMPs. And so we've got links here. Everything we do in Portage is bilingual, so we've got English and French versions. So there's a kind of a 1-2 pager around creating an effective DMP. So we've got the links to English and French there. It goes over much of what I've just done, so it's a bit of a refresher, but maybe some additional details in there as well. And then currently we have 3 exemplar DMPs released. And again, both of those are available bilingually. 2 are digital humanities based, and 1 involves secondary data. The 3rd is a mixed methods, and it's actually one that I wrote. It's fictitious, though it's based on the many, many mixed methods projects I've been involved in. And so it does actually provide links and resources. It speaks about, for instance, Compute Canada's rapid access service. It talks about Dataverse and other features. It does talk a lot about some things specific to U of A, but things like Compute Canada are not specific to U of A. Those are things that others can use. And as I mentioned, we have another 8 in flow right now. We just had our meeting yesterday, and 2 are pretty much ready to go, and another 4 really close. So we hope to see all of those released by, I'd say, mid-September. Maybe we'll release some that are ready earlier. They will be transformed and formatted and translated, and then we'll get those released as well. So feel free to take a look at those, and hopefully they're helpful to you as well as examples. And those new ones coming are focusing more on some discipline specific as well. So we've got health-based, we've got some more humanities, comp science, and so forth, natural sciences. So now I just want to give you some information around the DMP Assistant. So this is the website for Portage. The link's at the top. If you're not familiar with Portage, I'll just give you a real kind of bird's eye view, close note summary of what Portage is. There's a link right on that webpage for the DMP Assistant where you can click on it, sign in, sign up, and we're going to look at that here momentarily. Portage is a national research data management network that was launched by the Canadian Association of Research Libraries in 2015, so it's quite young. but it really amazes me how much work has been done through Portage, and how important it's been to our landscape, what a firm hold it has on it. I shouldn't say hold, but place it has in providing resources and expertise, and even during these really challenging months virtually, we've been having regular water cooler chats where I've seen people across Canada coming in and we're talking, or we've been doing lots of webinars and developing resources. We certainly have not let our circumstances slow us down. It's comprised of really two broad strokes. First is a network of expertise. So these are pan-Canadian RDM experts, and these will span across libraries, but also in academia and IT, infrastructure, lots of different types of stakeholders, and looking to provide resources and tools and expertise around the various areas of research data management. And then infrastructure platforms, so helping to develop, implement, and deliver various RDM-related infrastructure and service components. The two biggest ones are the DMP Assistant, and then the Federated Research Data Repository that we've mentioned. And again, everything that happens in Portage is bilingual, so all resources, all platforms, everything is available bilingually. This is a bird's eye view of Portage, and actually could be updated, but it gives you an idea, at least, around the types of expert groups that Portage has. So things like data management planning. So that's the group that I co-chair. I'm also on the research data management training group since its inception. We also have expert groups around curation and preservation, and data repositories. We've got some working groups that have been working on Dataverse activities. So we've got a national group called Dataverse North, as well as focusing on sensitive data. So that's not just thinking about health data, but also thinking about different types of data. And certainly one thing that I haven't spoken directly to on this presentation, but respecting all of the different niche types of data out there, and very specifically, I'll think about Indigenous related knowledge and data, and First Nations, Métis. There's lots and lots of work to be done there. We've got some great organizations in Canada. Portage is very supportive and starting to work formally with some of those. The First Nations Information Governance Center is probably the one that comes to most people's mind, and their principles of OCAP, which is ownership, control, access, and possession of data, and just making sure that we're thinking about the principles and doing things appropriately in alignment with those. And so you can see we've got, I think now that 125 experts could go up to about 140, and I think we're about 65 organizations now. I was somewhere out here, but I tend to be gravitating towards the epicenter now as I get more and more involved with Portage. But I think of Portage like I think of volunteering, in that I think anyone will agree that if you volunteer, and I have in different ways, I tend to feel like I get more out of it than I put in. I do put in a lot into Portage, but there's so much that I get out of it, and I'm able to bring back to my own institution, to my colleagues, and to the researchers. And on some days, my closest colleagues are those in Portage or at institutions, my colleagues at other institutions. Here, I work in a niche area, research data management, so not everyone around me are immediate people that I work with. So it's nice to have that kind of broader community and expertise and community to tap into. So just looking at the DMP Assistant, I'm just going to go through quickly. These, again, are categories, features around the DMP Assistant. So what does it do? It can support cross-institutional research collaboration. Anybody can access the DMP Assistant. You do not need to pay any fees. You do not need to be at a research institution. So you could have a data management plan. You could share it out with stakeholders. Maybe those are stakeholders in various sectors that are part of your research project, or providing guidance to it. It is web-based, bilingual. As I mentioned previously, it is endorsed by the Tri-Agency. I have, it's been a while now, but I had reviewed the, in quotations, final version of their draft RDM policy before they were to release it to give feedback. And of course, that's been delayed, but they have continued to endorse it within the guidance as well. So it's not to say you have to use it, but if you're going to be creating a data management plan, it's good to have some standards and make sure that you're covering your bases. And currently we're developing a number of new templates that will be brought into the DMP Assistant, disciplinary and methodologically specific templates. So hopefully those will be able to support more and more niche and very specific types of research. It comes with guidance and examples, so it doesn't just say fill this out. but actually helps you to understand how, and maybe there's some resources, for instance, links out to metadata standards, things like that. You can have multiple DMPs, just like you are likely and can be involved in multiple research projects and in different ways. So I have yet to find the ceiling. I've created a lot of DMPs, or I'm part of DMPs. So it's great to be able to have those and have a spot where they all are. I can just go get to them at any time. And you can have different levels of access. So somebody could be a co-owner or an editor, or even just a read-only access. Maybe you have a trainee that you want to have read, or just a collaborator. So you can share those out. You can change those very quickly, and you can give access very quickly just by entering somebody's email. If they have their DMP account, then they're going to automatically get access to it. If they haven't got the account yet, that'll be their prompt to create the account, which is quite easy. All the data management plans are exportable for different formats, so PDF or text or Word, for instance. And again, it's a living document. So this is a place that you can come back to, and you can modify and change your DMP and update it as needed. So this is a part where I have a few screenshots here. So there's the main page and sign in, sign up. Rather than going to the screenshots, I'm going to get brave. I'm going to see if we can do a quick kind of live, actually I don't need to do that, live demo. So I've already signed in, so forgive me, just for time, I've skipped the create an account part. I think most people can do that fairly easily. But this is what it looks like currently as you sign into the DMP Assistant. And I say currently because we are in the midst of upgrading it to a 2.0 version that we hope to launch later August or into September. And so the look's going to change a little bit, but nothing really steep in terms of end user functionality or navigation or interface. But this is what it looks like here. So right now you can see that, yeah, I'm part of a few DMPs. I've got a couple of accounts, so this is one of them. So when I sign in, I can either go and create a plan, or I can access an existing plan. So I'm going to access an existing plan, and this is the DMP Exemplar, that mixed methods one that I spoke to, that we released through Portage. I can quickly see some high-level metadata. So here's the name of it. I know how many people I've shared it with. In this case, it's just myself, but you can see some others up here. I'm collaborators on some actual projects where we've got 6 people accessing and working with it. I can edit it, go in and edit it really quickly. I could share it out to somebody. So again, that's that co-owner, edit, read only. I could export it. I could delete it if I was done with it. Maybe I drafted something. So I'm just going to click on that link there. This is the next view I get. And so this is the kind of study level metadata that I've entered in. So I've given it a plan name, and then there might be some identification numbers that you want to tag to it. I'm the principal investigator in this sense. I've got my contact email, and then that brief description of what my project is. So in this case, that it's an Exemplar DMP mixed methods. If I want to, I can go in and click on edit, and I can edit these details. And this is what it would look like at the start if you were just creating it. These would all just be blank, and then you would enter in your information. But let's say that you have a change in PI or something else. You're changing the name of it, or whatever the case might be. You can always go in and you can edit your metadata on that. So I'm just going to save that again. You can't see them all, but here's, again, at this page, kind of the high level view, and you can recognize fairly quickly these categories: data collection, documentation metadata, storage backup. Those are the categories we just went through and talked about. And then very high level, here's all of the questions that are associated with this particular template. So these are all the questions in my DMP that I'm going to be answering. So if you just want to have a really kind of one-stop view of it, or for any given section, this is the one to look at. But now let's say that I want to go and I want to answer questions. And again, if you were starting this from scratch, you would do this, and you would get to your categories and questions, and they would all be blank. This is your next view. And let's say that I want to first understand, have I done anything here yet? Yeah, I've got data collection, 6 questions, 6 answered, which is great. I will put an asterisk on that, it doesn't take a whole lot for it to acknowledge it being answered, like a keystroke. So it's not saying that you've got good answers or complete answers. It's just saying you've looked at it in that sense. But now, let's say I want to get in there and start answering questions around data collection. You've got, for any given category, these plus signs on the right. I can click on that. And away I go. For any questions, so I'm not going to go through all the question content. This is for the functionality piece, but any question, you get the same view. I've got a place for me to capture text. I've got a toolbar here that anyone who's used, Word or Google Docs will be familiar with. I can create different colors and sizes of font. I can go in there and highlight things. I can add hyperlinks, which I am a big fan of. Anyone who works on DMPs with me, or slides, I like to give links to resources and things, tables. So this is where you can actually go in there and start capturing information. There's also guidance on the side. Some are more extensive than others, and we are actually looking to expand and improve on the guidance, and specifically with those templates that we're developing and creating now, as well as give more guidance and ability to institutions to customize their own guidance. So administrators of a DMP assistant templates at their own institution, you may have supports that are very specific to your institution that aren't available elsewhere. We want institutions to be able to provide that information for their researchers in there, and that's certainly something that I look to do here at U of A. So you've got the guidance notes. You've also got share notes here. So this could be a share note that I have, for instance, with a co-owner. And it could be that we are talking about data collection or storage of data. And I could have a share note that says, hey, Lydia, have we talked about where we're actually going to store our data? I don't think we've made a decision. And we can have a little side conversation that's not open to everybody. For instance, if I go to give that read-only to a student, they don't necessarily see all that. They still think that we're all knowing and omnipotent and know all the answers. But we can have those side conversations there and have some provenance around it and track it. Here is the, so that's really what it looks like for any given question. At this point, it's not overly exciting, but it's really easy to use and functional. The power is in the categories and the questions and the guidance. And again, we're evolving that as we move forward. Here, if I click on the share, I can now do the sharing piece. So I can see that I am a co-owner. I could go and let's say this was somebody else. I could quickly change them to editor read only. If I wanted to add the collaborator, I would just have to add in their email. And once I have that there, I then choose what I want them to be. And then I can then add the collaborator on there as well. So as long as they have an account, they're going to automatically see it next time they sign in. And if they don't have an account, that'll be their cue to create the account. And upon signing in, it'll then show up for them. If I want to export my DMP, I click on the export button. Really simple. There's a drop down here. I've got lots of different ways that I can export the data management plan as well. So that is a bit of a crash course on the functionality of the DMP. I do, so you've got screenshots there as well, but I want to point to you on one of my last slides here. This is a short tutorial video, so under 5 minutes, and it runs you through all of the things I just showed you and more in probably a better way than I just did even. And it was put out by colleagues at Dalhousie University. I use it quite a lot and I get really good feedback on it. Unfortunately, it's only available in English because it's not an actual Portage video. But once we migrate to our 2.0 version, we're going to be putting out some new resources. I'll be putting on more webinars. I can potentially do another one for ACENET as well. And we'll be creating some more training resources, including online modules. And I would hope and I will advocate for a short video like this as well. So feel free to look at that again, and hopefully that's really helpful for you. And just before stopping and opening up generally, we've got about 15 minutes after this, I just want to give you a sense of what's happening moving forward. So I've mentioned a few times now that we're migrating DMP Assistant 2.0. So that's currently underway. Anyone who's been part of technology-based platforms and migrations know that it's painless if you say it fast enough. There's a ton of details. We've actually been working with Portage. I've got colleagues here at U of A. Of course, we are not just a door away anymore where we can knock on each other's office. We have a lot of Zoom calls. It's very detailed work, so it's taken a little longer than we'd hoped. We're also collaborating with the folks at the Digital Curation Center over in the UK because they've got the code base for their platform that is the same one for here. So it made sense to really work with them on that. So stay tuned, and there's going to be lots of enhanced features. Most of them are on the administrator end. So again, thinking about an institution has an administrator of the DMP, all the things that they can do to support modifying, customizing their DMP templates and guidance, getting metrics around the usage of their DMP and so forth. but there's some nice features coming in for end users as well, and little things, not really steep learning curve ones, but things like spell check within a DMP. Like that's a little thing that I love so much because I type and I make mistakes all the time, or I was working on exemplars and exporting out and then re-importing in. I was catching spelling mistakes when I exported out to Word. So it's nice to have little things like that. And also creating a copy of a DMP, which I think is great because, if you're working in an area of research, then it stands to reason that that specific area of research, when you create DMPs, that you might be creating new ones that are very similar. It might not be exactly the same, but to have to start all from scratch and copy and paste each category and questions and modify can be a bit painful. So being able to start with a copy of the DMP and then use that as the foundation for your next DMP, I think that's the immediate thing I think about anyways. We're also developing a steering committee for the DMP Assistant. It has not had that to date. Now, something, again, when I came on as co-chair of DMPEG, my co-chair and I, and Portage was very supportive of this, wanting to formalize things a bit more and have a nice broad perspective of stakeholders. So this will help to guide the ongoing development of the DMP Assistant, and certainly as we move forward into our Andrio environment as of October 1, the new digital research infrastructure organization. There'll be lots of different types of stakeholders, so Portage and DMPEG and community and researchers, and we will look to have that in place by fall 2020, which will be timely because it speaks to our next point. As part of the new Andrio funding, we were successful in making case for and getting support to hire a new Portage DMP assistant coordinator. And so that will be a position that is solely dedicated to all things data management plan, with, roughly speaking, how we're thinking about it, about a 50-50 split between supporting the DMP assistant and then the activities on the data management planning expert group. But because they're dedicated to all things DMP, we can kind of play with that time as needed a bit. So those postings are out now. I don't know how many applicants they get. They've had a great time and job getting really great people working with Portage, so I have no doubt that'll happen as well here. So we look forward to having that position in place in October. And then I've talked about the new templates, and that's really an important one because, again, we've got fairly generic templates in there, the Portage templates. So all those categories and some of the sense of the questions that we went through there are great, but once you get into specific types of research, we really recognize that there's specific questions and things you need to think about. When I'm thinking about health-based research, from my experiences, I'm going to think more about privacy and security and confidentiality and supporting all those things as an example. But when I start to move into natural sciences and larger projects, I may or may not be thinking about those, but oftentimes magnitude of data becomes something that really comes onto the radar, again, using those terabyte scenarios. So we're building different templates to help support, hopefully, more optimally development of data management plans for those areas of research. And I'm just wrapping up, hopefully I wrap it up next week, one for mixed methods. I've also been involved in one for arts-based research, and we've got, I think, another 7 or 8 in flow right now. And again, we hope to see those built into the DMP Assistant by the fall. So that's the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. I can go back to any slide if I need to, but in case anybody wants to see faces as we talk, and I'm happy to take questions, whether through chat or if people want to open up mics. So let Lydia take it away.